Our text is the 23rd chapter of Luke, where we have been studying. And Luke has brought us to this. This is the central moment, not just of biblical history, but of all history. Ever since God's promise to Adam and Eve in the garden that there would come a seed of the woman who would crush the head of the serpent, this has been the focus of all biblical prophecy. Every time God has sent judgment, it was in anticipation of this judgment. Every time a priest has offered a sacrifice, it was looking forward, casting a shadow backward, if it were, from this sacrifice. And even beyond the crucifixion, everything we read in the epistles, everything in the book of Revelation is built upon what Jesus did on the cross. There can only be a future kingdom, a time when he comes and establishes his kingdom on earth because he has redeemed his people on the cross. So as we take up the story here, Jesus has been led to Calvary, Simon of Cyrene, compelled to carry the cross. And then Luke tells us in verse 32 that two others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that's called the Skull, there they crucified him. And the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching. But the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his elect, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, and we indeed justly? For we're receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is the moment. This is the central moment of all of God's revelation. This is the central act of his redemptive history. When you read this text, Luke is bringing this out. He's already connected Jesus to the suffering servant of Yahweh in Isaiah 53. Here, he connects him to that psalm that Brother Chris read, Psalm 22, and the description of him fits that. The mockers that watch him, the response that he has there, all of it points to Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament. This is the moment when prophecy becomes history. And Luke, notice how sparse his language is. There's no adornment of the description. We don't hear the sound of clanging hammers on rusty nails. There's nothing there about on a hill far away. There is no hill. That's our romanticized version of it. None of the gospel writers ever talk about a hill. In fact, Jesus would have been crucified right by the road. He would have been there where people walking by had to see him. They could hear his cries. They could smell the stench of death in the air as men were crucified, bleeding and dying. This was the whole point, not to take them afar off, not to lift them high up, but to make them accessible to the populace, to strike fear into their hearts. And Luke simply describes it with these words, "There they crucified him. But what four words could say it better? There, it was a precise place. The God who spoke the universe into existence, the God who exists outside of time and space and matter, entered his own creation in a little place called Bethlehem. And he grew up in a backwater town called Nazareth. And he preached in a region unknown to most of the world called Galilee. And now he's come to Jerusalem, to the temple where he's been confronted and arrested and now crucified. He has entered into time and space in a specific place, in a specific way, a precise place. It was there that they crucified him. It was a particular people. Notice Luke does not put the blame on any one group. It's not merely the Jews. It's not merely the priests. It's not merely Pontius Pilate. It's not merely the Roman soldiers. It's they. He came into his own, and his own received him not. The world he created has rejected him. The people who have been given his word and the oracles of God, and they've been foretold that he's coming, they've said, we don't want him. We will not have this man to rule over us. And they rejected him. They crucified him. It was a painful death. Of all the deaths Jesus could have died, he died this one that was particularly cruel, one that could in some way portray to humanity the depths to which Jesus sunk, the lengths to which Jesus went, the vastness of his love that we just sang about. Paul describes it in Philippians chapter 2 when he speaks of Jesus, who being in the form of God, didn't consider his equality with God something to cling to, something to grasp, but he emptied himself. He humbled himself, and he took upon himself the form of a servant, but not just any servant. The angels are servants. He became lower than the angels. He was found in fashion as a man, and being a man, he was a humble man, a poor man. He becomes obedient to the point of death, but not just any death, even the death of the cross. They crucified him. He is the perfect sacrifice. He's crucified with sinners. He's crucified by sinners. He's crucified for sinners, but he himself is sinless. He is God in the flesh. He lives a perfect life of obedience to the Father. He never violates the Father's will at any point in his life, and yet he is crucified. This is the very purpose for which Jesus came. This is the moment for which he has lived. This is the reason for which he was born. And it is here at the cross, at the place called the skull, that his intention becomes action. And as the soldiers divide his garment and cast lots for it, as they nail his hands to that crossbeam, as they lift it up and put it on the stake there, jarring his body into place, that was there he cried, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is a prayer unlike any other prayer ever prayed or even dreamed of. From whose lips could it come but from the lips of a divine being? Such a loving, forgiving, God-like prayer proves Jesus to be the Messiah. I mean, who else had ever prayed like this? Not David or the kings. I mean, the Psalms are filled with these psalms, these prayers of imprecation, invoking the wrath of God to be poured out on their enemies. Blessed is the one who dashes their little ones against the stones. That's the prayer of David and the kings. This is not the way Elijah prayed. If Elijah were here, surely he would have prayed. He would have called fire down from heaven upon the centurion and upon his soldiers for doing such a thing. No one has prayed like this. I do not suppose that the thieves crucified beside Jesus had ever heard anything like this. I doubt they appreciated it fully, but it must have certainly impressed deeply one of them, because it made him know that his fellow sufferer was a being about whom there is an exceeding mystery of godliness. This prayer, unlike any others, it is a prayer of agony. We can't divorce it from its context, can we? Do you notice when it is that Jesus prays this? It's while they're crucifying him. They had just driven in the nails. They had lifted up the cross and dashed it down into its socket and dislocated all his bones so that he could say in Psalm 22, I am poured out like water and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is melted within me like wax. His hands are stretched upon the transverse beam. His feet were fastened to the upright tree, and it's there that he pleaded. Silently, his hands and his feet are pleading. His agonized body, from every muscle, from every joint, from every sinew, is pleading with God. His sacrifice is now presented there before the Father's face. It's not yet complete. It's not yet finished. But in his will, it's complete. Because he's going to endure the suffering of the cross and bring many sons to glory. And what do we hear from his lips? Instead of a cry or a groan or a curse, this dear Son of God says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. It's a plea of affection. Let's think of this. What is it that Jesus pleads when he asks for their forgiveness? He bases it on his sonship. He says, Father, forgive them. He's the Son of God, and he puts his sonship right into the scale of justice to plead for us. Father, since I'm your son, grant to me this request and pardon these wicked, sinful rebels. Father, forgive them. I can't comprehend the weight of the rights of Jesus' sonship. He is the Son of God. He can ask anything from God and he will grant it. He could call legions of angels to come and to destroy the world if he wants, and God would grant it. But what he asks for, what he pleads for with his sonship, is for the forgiveness of these wicked people. He's not a son like you and I are by adoption. He is the eternal Son by filiation. That is, he proceeds from the Father. He's very God of very God, light of light, the second person of the divine Trinity. And he takes his sonship and he puts it there before God. And he says, Father, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Oh man, the power of that one word from the lips of the Son of God when he is wounded, when he's in agony, when he's dying. He says, Father, Father, grant my one request. Oh, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. We don't see it, but the great and holy head of God bows in indication that the petition is granted, because it's a plea of absolution. He prays for something very specific with his sonship. He prays for our forgiveness. To omit that, to leave that out, would be to miss the very essence of his prayer. He asks for full absolution for his enemies. Father, forgive them. Don't punish them. Forgive them. Don't remember their sin. Forgive it. Blot it out. Throw it into the depths of the sea. Remember it no more, Father. Don't mention it against them anymore forever, Father. Forgive them. What a blessed prayer, for the forgiveness of God is broad and deep. When you and I forgive, we still carry the memory of the thing done against us, don't we? We say, oh, forgive and forget. Nobody does that. We might forgive as an act of will and obedience, but we don't forget. We still remember it. It lingers there in our memory, and if ever the person messes up again, we say, see, I knew they'd do it. But when God forgives, he says, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. And it's this that Christ asked for you and for me long before we had any repentance, any faith. And in answer to that prayer, you and I were brought one day to feel our sin and to grieve our sin and to confess our sin and to believe in him who pleaded for us on Calvary's cross. Notice they didn't ask for forgiveness for themselves. Jesus asked for forgiveness for them. Their hands were stained with his blood. And it was then, even then, that Jesus prayed for them. Think of the great love by which he loved us, even when we were yet sinners, when we loved our sin, when we drank it down like a camel drinks water. Even then, he prayed for us while we were yet without strength. In due time, Christ died for the ungodly. Praise his name, because he prayed for you when you did not pray for yourself. He prayed for you when you were crucifying him. It is a plea of abundance. I love this prayer because of its indistinctness. He just says, Father, forgive them. He doesn't say, Father, forgive the soldiers that have nailed me to this tree. He doesn't say, Father, forgive the people who are staring at me. Though he does not mention the soldiers, he includes them. Though he does not mention those who surround him like bulls of Bashan, he includes them. He means them. He does not say, Father, forgive sinners in ages to come who will sin against me. But he covers them. Jesus does not mention any of them by any accusing description. He doesn't say, Father, forgive my enemies who hate me. He doesn't say, Father, forgive my murderers who put me to death. There is no word of accusation that comes from those precious lips. He just says, Father, forgive them. I can crawl into that pronoun. There's room in there for me. Can you? Can you get in there? Oh, by simple faith, appropriate the cross of Christ simply by trusting in it. It's like a great chariot of mercy that God has sent down from the skies, which anyone by faith can enter in, and it will take you to heaven. Jesus prayed, Father, forgive them. And that's me. And that's you if you'll have it. And if Christ has borne my punishment, that means I never will bear it. If God has forgiven me, I never shall be punished. Jesus did that on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. There are two thieves crucified by Jesus. Now, we know from the other Gospels, and there are other words used for them. Luke calls them kakargoi, which simply means evildoers, bad guys. In the other Gospels, they're called lestes, which is the common word for thief. And yet, when Josephus is talking about the insurrectionist, the first century terrorist who tried to overthrow Rome and get Rome out of Israel, and they would kill Roman soldiers, and they would slit the throats of tax collectors. The word that Josephus used for them is lestes. We don't know for sure. I tend to think these guys were in cahoots with Barabbas. It just makes sense that on this particular day, 3 men, all of them insurrectionists, all of them caught in their crimes, were going to be executed together. Pilate has released Barabbas, but these two, we don't know their names. They're not as notorious as he. They're going to be crucified, and along with Jesus, they're taken outside the city walls. They're at the place called the Skull, cranium in Latin, Golgotha in Aramaic, cranium in Greek rather, and Calvary in Latin. Luke just calls it the skull. There they're crucified, and as they're being crucified, originally Mark tells us that both of these thieves rail on Jesus. They mock Jesus. Is there anything greater evidence of the depravity of the human heart than this? That as a man dies, as he's gasping for breath, because this is what crucifixion does. It robs you of air. Your body stretches ever tighter. Your lungs elongate. You can't get air. And over the course of hours, sometimes even days, crucifixions could last days if the soldiers would allow it to continue that long. You just slowly lose the capacity to inhale, and you asphyxiate. Breath is precious to a crucified man, and yet they waste theirs. They take the time to mock Jesus, to rail on Jesus. But as this unfolds, something takes place. One of these thieves, hearing Jesus as he prays, watching Jesus as he dies, is changed. And in that moment, awareness of Jesus becomes confession. And listening to everyone else say what they say to Jesus, seeing the soldiers divide his garment and cast lots for it, somehow this thief puts it all together. I want you to see something. Notice, first of all, what these two thieves are. These two thieves represent all of humanity because they're alike in every way but one. There's not a question that one of them is innocent, one of them is guilty. Both of them are culpable. They're guilty. Their confession, even on the cross, is of their guilt. Both are condemned. They have been justly condemned to die because they've committed capital crimes. Both of them originally are contemptuous of Jesus. They, according to Mark 15, the King James Version says they cast the same in his teeth. While others are mocking Jesus, both of them originally do. But then compare what they saw, because these two thieves witness exactly the same thing. They see the same truth. They see Jesus' condemnation, but his condemnation is not due to his character. See, they're condemned because their character has shown itself in their crimes. Jesus has done nothing wrong. They see Jesus suffering with them, but he's not suffering like them. I mean, they're groaning, cursing. Jesus is praying to the Father, not for deliverance, but for the forgiveness of his murderers. Now pay close attention to what each of these thieves then wanted, because the two thieves both exhibit a different response. As one hangs there suffering, he's hardened by what he suffers. And he joins in along with the others. Notice how Luke hammers us with one verb 4 times. The chief priests say he saved others, Let him save himself if he's the Christ, the Messiah, God's elect, God's chosen one, the chosen stone. Let him save himself like he saved others. By the way, it's the first time they ever admitted he saved others. And then even the Roman soldiers get in on the act. After they've parted his garments and cast lots for it, after they've mocked him by offering him vinegar to add to the desperation of a dying man whose throat is parched, and to give him an acidic drink like vinegar. They say, hey, save yourself if you're the king of the Jews. And now the unbelieving thief, gasping for breath, pushing up so he can breathe, pushing up on the nails in his feet, says, hey, if you are the Christ of God, save yourself. And while you're at it, save us. Listen to the response of the one we call the believing thief. He does not say, are you that inhumane? Don't you care more than that for your fellow man? He says, don't you fear God? Don't you fear God? Seeing that you're enduring the same sentence of condemnation as he. And then he changes to the first person plural. And we indeed justly. See how he puts himself in there in the guilt. We indeed justly. We're dying because we deserve to die. We're guilty of our crimes. But this man has done nothing wrong. And then he says it. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Now see, these two thieves are evidenced by what they say. You want to know someone's heart? Listen to what they say. That's not just true of thieves dying on the cross. It's true of you and me. What is the testimony your lips bear of who Jesus is? One of them cries out only for Jesus to rescue him from his circumstances. Hey, can't you get us down off this cross? But one wants Jesus only to remember him. Do you get it? Luke gives us this unanticipated verb we've heard. Save, 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 save. And now this guy is so humble, he just says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He doesn't ask Jesus to save himself. He doesn't even ask Jesus to save him, because somehow the Spirit of God has so worked in this dying thief that he's put it all together. We don't know. The text tells us nothing about him. We know from the fact that he's crucified, it's almost certain that he's Jewish. And if he's an insurrectionist, he's probably a religious Jew, because he thinks the Romans are defiling the land. And maybe he knows the Old Testament scriptures very well. He's gone to temple his whole life. He would have sung the songs of ascent as he went to the temple on Passover. And somehow they're hanging on that cross. He puts it all together. He hears Jesus cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's how Psalm 22 begins. And Jesus fits. Everything about the crucifixion fits Psalm 22. And the way he hears Jesus cry out to God with intimacy, with personal knowledge, somehow he knows. He doesn't have to ask Jesus to save himself, because Jesus is saved. And he knows this is not the end. I mean, this is absolutely remarkable. He knows that Jesus is the king. He says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's not what you say to a dying man. And yet he acknowledges Jesus as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he says, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, would you just remember that the guy who died beside you knew who you are? remember me. Now let's take a moment and contrast what they believed. The unbelieving thief believes Jesus is just some failed prophet dying on a cross like him, but the believing thief gets it. Can you put yourself in his place? And can you suppose yourself to be looking on someone who hangs in agony on a cross? Could you believe that that dying man struggling for breath and grasping for air to be the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, can you believe that he is about to enter into heaven, into the very presence of God and make an atonement for his people? Can you look at him and see him as the Lord of glory and the King? What remarkable faith from this thief who believed in a crucified, derided, and dying Christ and cried to him as one whose kingdom is to come. And this thief's faith is the more remarkable because he himself is in incredible agony and pain and bound to die. Can we just admit it's not easy to exercise faith and confidence when you are being tortured with deadly anguish? When your own mind is troubled by anxiety and you toss and turn through the night because of worry and you think, I can't handle it. It's hard in those moments of your own personal mental torture to really put your trust in God, isn't it? Can you imagine in the agony of suffering that this thief endures, he's still able to see Jesus for who he is? This man, suffering as he did, sees the Savior in so sad a state that he nonetheless believes that he's the one who has authority over life eternal. I believe such faith is seldom seen. It's a crucified man trusting in a crucified Christ. When our frame is racked with torture, when our tenderest nerves are pained, when our body is hung up to die by some great length of torment, then to forget the present and to live in the future is a grand achievement. To say, I believe that what I see here is not the end. This is not the truth. What is to come is what matters. In the future is deliverance. And while dying, to turn to another one who's dying at your side and to trust your very soul to him, that's phenomenal, marvelous, incredible faith. And Jesus sees faith where other people don't see it. Imagine the people standing around at the crucifixion, seeing these three men die. They have no idea what's going on there. As Jesus, the Lord of glory, the King of Kings, is about to die and to come into his kingdom. And just to show that he's still sovereign, that he has authority over everything in this life and in this world, there he snatches a soul from the very gate of hell to take with him to heaven. Could there be greater demonstration of his sovereignty than this? And Jesus speaks this word to him. He speaks to a changed heart of repentance. He speaks to one who has a complete recognition of his lordship. He speaks to his confident belief in the resurrection. By the way, that's the remarkable thing. Jesus has been telling the apostles for months now that the Son of Man has to be turned over to the Gentiles. He's going to be beaten. He's going to be put to death. But the third day, he's going to rise again. But where is their belief in the resurrection? None of them are standing at the foot of the cross saying, I know this looks bad, but he's going to rise again in 3 days. Don't let your heart be troubled. None of them are saying that. There's only one person in all the Gospels who believes in the resurrection of Jesus before it happens, and it's this thief. How incredible. Judas had sold him. Peter had denied him. The rest had forsaken him. But this dying thief called him Lord and said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That is splendid faith. And for this distinction, take note of what they received. Because when this thief accepted Jesus, his acceptance becomes promise. Look how Jesus responds to him. Today you will be with me in paradise. I love this text. And this, every little sentence Luke uses is just so pregnant with meaning. There they crucified him. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Today you will be with me in paradise. You know what Jesus does with that one sentence? He lets us see what's on the other side of death. How many times have you wondered, what's it like on the other side? Well, this is Jesus pulling back the curtain and telling us, notice that beyond death, there's personality. You will be with me in paradise. Get that? You don't go out of existence. You don't become somebody else. You are you. You will be with me in paradise. This is the promise that when the body dies, the person you are still lives. Every person has an undying soul that's going to exist somewhere for eternity. And Jesus says, you will be you. You will be with me in paradise. Beyond death, there's a place. He calls it paradise. That word's used 3 places in the New Testament. It's used here where Jesus promises this. It's used in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 when Paul talks about being caught up to what he calls the third heaven, and he calls that paradise. And again in the book of Revelation, it's equated with heaven. There are people that try and come up with all these strange theories about compartments in heaven and hell and what paradise means and it's different from heaven. Just forget all that. It's heaven. You'll be with me in paradise. Paul equates it with heaven. Revelation equates it with heaven. It's heaven. And he says, you're going to be with me in paradise. Beyond death, there's a place. And beyond death, there's a person. With me, Jesus says, in paradise. Those surely must be the 4 most comforting words in the Bible. That as this thief is dying, the promise he gets is he's going to be with Jesus in paradise. Here's what we know about death. What's on the other side? People are. And they have an everlasting soul that exists somewhere. But for those that have put their faith in Jesus, like this dying thief, they're in paradise with Jesus. Oh, do you see the glory of what Jesus is saying to him? And we look at these 2 thieves. They represent all of humanity. They're alike in every way. There's just one difference, and it's faith. And when you see the dying Christ, do you see the Lord of Lords and King of Kings? Do you see that as he dies, he pleads for you? Then profess that faith. Professing faith means confessing, first of all, I'm guilty. Just like the thief said, we are justly sentenced to death. I am condemned because of my sin. Jesus said, I didn't come in the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved. The world is condemned already, he said. He doesn't have to condemn the world. He doesn't have to condemn us. We're already condemned. And I'm helpless. I can no more save myself than those thieves on the cross could get themselves off of that cross. They were rendered completely helpless by the outcome of their sins. And so are you and I. We can't save ourselves. But when you see that Jesus is the Son of God, you know Jesus is divine. He is God in the flesh. That he is the King of Kings who is going to rule and reign. He is sovereign over this universe. When you see that Jesus is the Lord of life, you know that God raised him from the dead and vindicated him. And by raising him from the dead, he said that Jesus is alive, that he lives forevermore. He's always at the right hand of the Father, interceding for his people. If you have faith just like that thief, you're going to get the same promise that the thief got. When it's all over, the centurion will look at Jesus and say, truly, he is the Son of God. The crowds will beat their breast and hang their heads and feel bad about what happened. The women and the followers of Jesus will stand at a distance in sorrow. But that believing thief, he enters heaven with Jesus. You think about it. Jesus dies a little bit before the thief. What's Jesus' primary ministry? He's going to go and he's going to appear there in the most holy place in heaven. He's going to put his own blood on the mercy seat there before the throne of God. And he does that. And as soon as he does that, what is his first act as the Lord of glory who's entered into heaven to make an atonement for his people? He welcomes that dying thief into paradise. Can you imagine? Jesus in heaven welcoming this thief? This was the Lord's companion on the cross. He becomes the Lord's companion at the gate of heaven. Who is it that the King of glory gets up to welcome almost as soon as he arrives? Who is this favored companion of the Redeemer? Is it some honored martyr? Is it some faithful apostle? Is it some patriarch like Abraham or a prince like David? No, it's none of those. Look at this and be amazed at God's sovereign grace, because he who goes in the gate of paradise with the King of glory is a thief who was saved in the moment of death. If ever there was anything that proved to you your works don't save you, this guy is it. He's got nothing to offer. He's done nothing to accomplish his salvation. He has no good works. All he has is the belief, the faith that Jesus is King of Kings, that he's Lord of glory. And when he believes, Jesus sees that faith and counts it as righteousness, and he gets the same reward as Abraham. He gets the same reward as Paul, as Peter, as any believer, because he is in Christ. He's not saved in some inferior way. He doesn't enter heaven as some second-class citizen. Just like Luke has been telling us throughout the whole gospel, there's a reversal, right? The last shall be first. And here he is in heaven. But there are two thieves. There are two. One of them believed, one of them did not. They're alike in every way except one. And now for 2,000 years, one of them has enjoyed being in the presence of his Savior, and one of them has been separated from God in a Christless hell of torment. You need to be aware of the reality of failure to have faith. Both thieves committed crimes. Both thieves deserved death. Both thieves saw the same things. Both had an unending destiny and an immortal soul that would spend eternity somewhere. One thief professed faith, and one died in his sins. Listen to me. It's not enough to comprehend who Jesus is. It's not enough to feel sorry that he suffered and died on the cross. It's not enough to understand what he did. It's not enough to understand why you're lost or that you're condemned, that you're culpable of your sin. But when you see Jesus as Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and when you in humble faith say, Lord, remember me. When you confess and commit to Christ, it's enough. It's enough.